Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Construx Thinking Aloud webinar series. I am Mark Griffin, the host of Construx Inspect and Adapt podcast, and your host for this morning's webinar entitled Quantifying Value Requirements, featuring Construx technical service provider and CTO Earl Beede. Delivering value is critical for successful projects and a cornerstone of good development practices. But how do you know you have enough, if any? How can you set clear, measurable value statements for your project? In this webinar, Earl is going to share strategies to make all your requirements, including the ones that describe the value proposition, measurable. So let's face it, requirements are really hard. Anybody that tells you differently is completely wrong. Is that right, Earl?
Yeah, yeah. If this was easy, we wouldn't have to have webinars like this, right?
That's
And
right.
so this will be a fun time to sort of think about how we might be able to do these a little differently in the future. Um, I used to think everyone could do requirements easily because it was somewhat easy for me, but it turns out that I'm just genetically warped.
I can vouch for that, indeed. So a couple of housekeeping items I think I was going to state before we get started. Yes, this is being recorded, and we plan to have it up on our YouTube channel pretty soon. So if you don't already have that, you might wish to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we do continue to keep a steady stream of interesting things, different software development insights for you to use to improve your practices up there. So if you're not on board, get on board. Also, you can
Yeah.
ask questions. Also, you can ask questions anytime during the presentation. There's a Q&A function in the Teams window toolbar. Earl says he has some time at the end for a full Q&A if you choose to have something at the end of the seminar. And if you have difficulties in any way getting on, you can't hear us, raise your hand, send it to us using the chat. We'll try and help if we can. So as just a quick reminder for those of you who don't know Earl, if this is your first time seeing Earl, which is a big surprise, he's a CSDP, he's Construx's CTO, and he's a senior fellow here at Construx. He has many years experience as a manager, a systems analyst, a quality assurance representative, a process architect, and a consultant. He's designed and implemented improved software practices for companies in industries like telecom, computer hardware and software, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, oil and gas, retail, and many others. At Construx, Earl also designs and leads seminars and provides consulting services on agile methods, including early project lifecycle practices, estimation, requirements, quality assurance, contract management, and software methodologies. And as a bit of final trivia, he used to raise chickens in his spare time. I guess that means you used to means you don't have them anymore, or they have come to your dining room table.
Yeah. Yeah. We have two like 15-year-old chickens. And so we don't really raise them. They're like chicken senior citizens. And so they just sort of mope around and eat.
That's fascinating. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Earl, I'm going to hand you the baton, so go for it.
Right.
Enlighten
Well,
us.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And welcome everyone from me. I'm Earl Beede. And I'm playing a little bit with words here. I'm talking about quantifying user value. When I talk about quantifying value requirements, is it really about value or is it really more about requirements? And hopefully you'll see a little bit of mix of both of these. Because my real goal here is that when people start talking about what they want out of a project, you can start saying, are we going to achieve it? Is there something measurable about that you can actually quantify pretty well? So we'll see if we can pull that off or not. And maybe some of you will say, I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see what I can do with that. So what I'm going to be thinking about in order to pull this off? Well, I have to talk a little bit what I mean by value. We have to do a little bit of value review there. And then we'll go in and we'll spend most of our time in trying to figure out how to quantify that value and how I'm going to tie those values to certain kinds of requirements that are on projects. And then I have some supporting thoughts, that's some sort of bonus material, if you will, and then we'll wrap it up. And so that's where I'm trying to go for the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. And just a reminder of today's tech, there's that Q&A button up at the top of the Teams window that you can submit questions at any time, and I will have time at the end. There is some reactions. If you think something is going well or something's crazy, you can do that. And I am recording the talk. I did push the start button a little late on mine, but Teams is recording it, which is a crappy image, and I've got a really good image that hopefully I'll use for YouTube going forward. So that's where we're at today. So let's go ahead and get into the first section and really talk about value. And the reason I have to talk about value, so it's like this is one of those things where I have to talk about one thing so I could talk about something else, right? I need to make sure we're on the same page with this idea of value so that when I talk about trying to quantify it, we all are quantifying the same thing. So let's just take a look for a moment at this concept of value. And one of the things I want to state from the beginning, when I talk about value, I'm not talking necessarily about functions by themselves, right? So when someone says, "Hey, my piece of software has this cool feature," well, that feature is really sort of a function. It's something it does. But if it only does it in a way acceptable to me when I'm trying to get my job done, so I think value is not just doing a thing, but doing a thing in an acceptable way. And for some of you, hopefully hearing this idea of an acceptable way might perk your ears a little bit with the concept of potentially a thing called, what is the criteria that I judge something's acceptable? What are my acceptance criterion? We're thinking about that a little bit and see if we can keep that in the back of our mind. So one of the things I'm saying is that value doesn't come from just doing a thing in an acceptable way. I can have a car that transports me just fine, but it's cold, it's wet, it's windy, the brakes don't work too well. I'm not going to get in it. So while it could do it, it's not acceptable, right? It's not worth the risk reward or the cost it might impose upon me to do it. So that's what we're sort of trying to get at. What do I do that's in an acceptable way? And so when we think about value, one of the things we need to think about is there's different ways of sort of categorizing value. I like to use these 4 categories that I'm about to list here. The first category is called utilitarian value. Utilitarian value is something that says, you do a job for me. So if I've used this example of the stamps, I'm going to have a braincast come out pretty soon that has this particular example. But a stamp, if you think about a stamp for a letter, right? A postage stamp. What is its utilitarian value? Well, it's not doing the mail, because the stamp doesn't mail anything. The stamp doesn't move that letter 1 inch. The only thing the stamp does is stick to stuff, right? It has some glue in the back, and I can use it as a wall covering or as a decoration. It does some sort of job, but it doesn't really do the job we think of it. Utilitarian-wise, what job does it actually do? This postage stamp just sort of covers something up, right? So utilitarian value, what is the job that does for me? My car moves me from A to B. My computer runs apps for me. So it does a job of some kind. What's the job something does for me? Another one is exchange value. And this is where stamps become much more interesting. Exchange value is, what can I trade this for? Now, here's where a stamp becomes kind of interesting, because I can trade this stamp to get someone else to move my mail for me. If I give them the stamp, they'll move my mail. I can exchange it. Money has tons of exchange value. Money typically has almost no utilitarian value. The money itself doesn't do a job. I guess money, you could burn it to try to make heat, but generally it can't do a lot for you. You have to exchange it for something else. So exchange value is, can I trade it for something to do a job for me? And then there's 2 other categories. Aesthetic value, I just like sensing it. Here with my stamp again, I might just like looking at it. It might be pretty. So aesthetic value is a low-level enjoyment. And its close cousin is emotional value. Emotional value is I have a strong feeling. Where aesthetic value is pretty general and could be widespread, emotional value tends to be very, very specific. So why talk about these 4 types of value? Well, when we're talking about trying to bring value to requirements, that we're trying to add value to requirements, what we really want to do is be focusing on this utilitarian value. Now, there is exchange value, there is aesthetic value, maybe even emotional value in your product. This is not a one thing fits all, but we really need to focus on utilitarian value. When I do a job for someone, how do I make sure I deliver value? How do I do that in a way that says, hey, you know what? You're going to deliver this value to me, and it's worth it to me to accept that. This is better than the alternatives I have to try to achieve the same thing. So we're going to be focusing primarily on utilitarian value, our little gears here. And to get us started saying when we deliver value, what does value mean? There is a starter kit for this. ISO 25010 has this list of things that says when I do that job, right? When I do that utilitarian value, I do that function, what makes that function acceptable? and they have two sets of lists. This is the specification list. And so this is the list that I use to help quantify my value requirements. How do I start talking about these things? And they have here, you see there's 8 major categories here, from functional suitability down to portability. And each of these things, I think, have been really well thought out about, when it does things, it does all 8 of these things. It doesn't do 1 or 2 of these things. It always does all 8. But some of these I care about more than others. For example, on one particular application, I may care about usability a lot, but portability is not one I care that much about. And we'll see this little difference come out a little bit later. But the 8 is just a start. It actually decomposes down to 31 subcategories. So this is a lot of things that you can start saying, here's a starter list, a starter kit I can use to start measuring my system. And I may not call it completeness. I may call it thoroughness or something like that. But this is just a starter kit to get you going. So now I've got 2 different aspects of when I'm thinking about value. I got this function and how I do acceptable way, this utilitarian value, and I can measure that hopefully using my starter kit. Now, from that starter kit, I said some things I care about more and some things I care about less. And so I like to bunk that into 3 categories, things I call my value plus, my value positive, my value negative, and my value null. So the key thing here is that I'm already starting out with the idea that there's already some other product, some other way of doing that utilitarian value for them, right? That function for them. I like to joke that my iPhone right here, there's nothing on it that I haven't been able to do for thousands of years. Why do I pay money for it? Because it has a better value proposition to me than the other ways of doing the same thing. I like reading my email, often much nicer on that than I can on my desktop, because it's more relaxed. I'm in a relaxed space. Both can do the same job, right? The utilitarian part. But one does it in a way that I find more valuable, more pleasing to me at most times. And this is one of the things we have to think about is whenever we think about value, we have to remember that there's some other means that's trying to deliver the same function, the same utilitarian work, that may not meet the same value proposition. And so when you start thinking about, okay, who's going to determine value, I have to start looking at a particular customer and say, okay, what are they going to judge the value by? And one category is I call the value positive. The value positive here talks about, hey, when I see this aspect, and when I say this aspect, it's going to be one of these things for the starter kit. Maybe it's the learnability. Maybe it's the capacity. Maybe it's the resource utilization. When I see that, I'm going to be making a positive value judgment. That is, the more of that you give me, the happier I'm going to be. Right. These are the things that actually I think are the primary decider of value. That is that they're looking at this. They already have a way of doing this, including do nothing, right? Because that's always an option. It's like, I want to do that function, but it's so cumbersome, so hard, so difficult that I don't bother to do it at all, right? And so when I look at that, it's that this is the thing I'm looking for to say, yes, this is why I want to switch to your new product versus the product I had before. These are my value positive areas. These are the ones that I'm going to say, I'm going to judge you on. If you're familiar with a Kano model, this might be the one line. I don't forget what Kano, I call it define, but it goes from a slash across it. There might be a match here in the Kano model if you're familiar with that. But generally, I think I like to think of these things as these are the ones that I have a way of doing this, including do nothing. And now I'm looking for another way because these ones are the ones I really want to improve on. This is what I'm judging the value of your property against. So these are the key ones that we're going to be focusing on going forward. But I also have value negative. Value negative says, you know what, I really don't make a positive value judgment, but I will make a negative value judgment if you screw it up. Now, what might that be like? Well, let's take chairs, for example. Whenever I teach this live, I love to talk about chairs. And one of the things I talk about with chairs is that if I have a chair and you're sitting in that chair and it's a reasonably good chair, you're thinking, great. You're going to be judging my overall presentation probably reasonably well based upon the presentation. If I gave you a big comfy chair, I really up the chair, you're not going to make my presentation any better or any worse. You're still going to be judging my presentation based upon the content, not about the comfiness of the chair. You might mention, yeah, it was a really comfy chair, but you're not going to change the value of my presentation. However, if I give you a really crappy chair, a really horrible chair. It doesn't matter how good my presentation is, you're going to hate everything because you were so uncomfortable in that chair. That's a value negative. If I screw it up, if I don't reach a certain level, and again, there's a reasonable thing like this in the Kano model, if I don't reach a certain level, you're going to say, I don't care what else is there, I hate it. If my phone crashes every 20 seconds, I don't care how wonderful everything else is, I hate it because it doesn't meet the thing. Now, if it just runs normally, fine. If it's someone else said, you know what, I last 24 days on a battery, well, okay, that's nice, but I plug it in every night, so it wouldn't really make any difference to me. I'm not going to judge it any better because of that. So value negative is not that I'm really watching it, but if you don't do at least a reasonable job, I'm dumping you like a hot potato, right? And so there's that kind of one. This is my, in a way, don't be stupid kind of threshold. And the idea here is the more you invest in this, you don't get a lot of return. Whereas my value plus, the more on the invest of it, I might actually get a good ROI. If I keep investing in my value negative, I don't tend to get a return on that investment at all. And there's my third guy, what I call my value null. My value nulls basically say, you know what, I'm not making any kind of value judgment on this whatsoever because it's not even on my radar. I don't even think about it. And the example I love to use of this is the maintenance cost of a Rolls-Royce Phantom. If I can afford a Rolls-Royce Phantom, I'm not worried about the cost of an oil change. It's just not entering my equation. It can be $10,000, it can be $200, it can be $20. It doesn't really matter. If I can afford a Rolls-Royce Phantom, I'm not worried about the cost of a mountain. It just doesn't even enter this. Now, there's a point where I guess it can become extremely bad. Right? That is, if you got it so bad, well, yeah, you bought your Rolls-Royce Phantom for $400,000, and the next oil change will cost you $18.2 million. Okay, you went off to fantasy screwy land. But generally, things aren't there, and so these are ones that don't really happen that often that I say I don't really care about. So there is a few of these typically on any kind of product we build that there's values that off that long list that we saw from ISO 215 that people are just not, it's not on my mind. So what do we do with these things? Well, each of those things from ISO 25010, we want to put on a scale of some kind. When I say a scale, I'm not saying like a measurement scale, like a weight thing or, you know, those balance things. What I'm talking about is a number system of some kind that has intervals that have a defined relationship. So when you think of my top scale here, I'm looking at like, you know, inches or feet or number of instances or something like that, right? So you can see that one has slightly more than the other. I can compare things. I can contrast them. Or even if it's just a dial, even on my, you know, my home bathroom scale, it will just start going up and I can start saying, okay, and I can then trend that over time and see what it looks like. So when I start seeing these categories, my value plus, value negative, or value null, I might want to, particularly for someone to start saying, okay, I think one of the things I care about might be learnability. And so I have to figure out a scale for learnability. I need to know I have to have some kind of scale. And that's the heart of quantifying value here. It's like, how do I get to a scale? But generally, when you think of scales, what you can simplify that is that any scale that we want to look at is going to have some sort of things for things that make me unhappy to things that make me really happy. Okay. That's the way I like to present it to organizations. They're saying, when you do this, for example, I'm working with a company right now that wants to work with an ultrasound machine, and they're going to say, okay, when the doctor is happy, because a lot of their requirements are saying the doctor's going to rate this as fairly happy, what's happening now that causes them to be sad face? Right? What's driving that negative value? And how are you going to change it so they move, and when they re-rank themselves, move toward the happier end? There's some sort of scale. It's going to be time to set it up. It's going to be the resolution of the images. Is it going to be the number of steps necessary? It's going to be the uptime. What is it that's making them sad face now that when they do this, they're going to say, that's how I'm going to judge you? So that's the kind of scales we're going to be looking for. How am I going to measure that? And then we're going to put that on a number system of some kind. So if you think about my three categories, value plus, value negative, where do they tend to land on these scales of reasonable values, state of the art, what's possible values? Well, my value plus ones tend to be toward the far end of the smiley face. what's interesting is you think about this, to get to there, to say, I'm really going to emphasize this particular value is going to tend to cost me a lot of resources, either time and or money. Why? Because if everyone had this, if it was easy to do, then it'd all be there and no one would be judging me positive value. There'll be more in my negative value category because it's all over the place. You're obviously having to do something that other people can't do very well to separate yourself out and say, this is why people would choose my product over someone else's product. They would think it has more value than some other product. And so my value plus areas really have to be at the higher end of the scale, which tends to cost me a lot more. And I tend to have to use technology in unique ways, right? Because again, if everyone could do the same exact thing, they'd be doing it. I wouldn't have any advantage. There wouldn't be any reason why you would choose my product over someone else's. So I have to find those places where I can apply technology somewhat uniquely or somewhat, maybe even cutting edge, brand new technology so that people can do this. And when I make out a list of values of all the values from that starter kit, very few tend to be in this category. One, because there's only usually a handful of things that people are trying to judge us against, really measure us against for something else. And two, I can't afford that as a product. If I have too many things up here really driving at that high cutting edge, applying technology in a unique way, I've got such complexity and hugeness that I probably will never get the project done. Contrast that with my value negative. These are much cheaper to build because they're using standard technology. They're using things that everyone else has. This is where most people are sitting when they do this kind of work. They're not trying to be cutting edge. They're just trying to say, hey, we need to be in the same world. Because remember, more investment here doesn't get me a lot. If I invest a lot more in my chair, I don't get a 10 more comfortable. I just get the same sort of level of stuff. So of return. So I don't want to invest a lot here. And most of the time when we're trying to think about value propositions, and especially when we're trying to tie it to what the needs of the customers are and giving those functions that utility, most of my value is going to live in this category. As long as I don't screw them up, I get them reasonably well, that's not what they're buying me for. They're buying me for before I put up in that value plus category up here. That's what's going to differentiate me. And of course, my value null that you can expect are going to be closer down here to the set phase because no one cares. I really want to try to limit my investment down here. I don't want to invest a lot down here. I don't want to get crazy, bad, make it obvious that I'm not investing, but I want to watch that money very, very carefully because investing here isn't going to get me any ROI whatsoever. And so I'm going to use technologies that have good track records, a long history of actually just working where I don't have to mess with it a whole lot. So this is the idea behind a lot of my value proposition. And so when we're talking about putting together value requirements, getting measurable, I'm going to be focusing primarily only on these because the rest of these, my team probably knows that pretty well. So this is what the thing I need to focus on. So when we talk about quantifying value requirements, it's going to be this one up on the top because that's the one that's going to get me to the customer who's going to say, yes, I'm going to choose your product because you deliver more value to me and the things that I care about. So like I said, all that was so I can tell you, let's talk about how we actually quantify this now, right? So we sort of said, okay, what's the territory that I need to go after? I need to figure out what my function is, my utilitarian work. Then I'm going to find out how do I do that in an acceptable way. That's where the ISO 215 thing comes in. I can start saying, okay, which of these start to be my value pluses? Which of these stand out? They're going to say, I'm judging you because this is the problem I have now, and I want to move from sad face to smiley face. And how do I actually put now numbers to that so it actually makes sense? So that's the question. We want to move from sad face to smiley face. How do I actually put some numbers on this? And this is like Mark said at the beginning, it's not easy. This is going to take some kind of amount of work. But I do have a few keys, right? First of all, I've hopefully focused on the function that they're watching, right? The function that they care about. I should know that somewhere. And I also know that this should be one of the value plus things. So it should be a few things. I shouldn't have to do this over and over again for everything. I can focus on the values that I believe stand out for them. So I got to figure out what those values are. And I also have to think about what are there other alternative options, including do nothing, that provides the same work. Because remember, this scale is not so much about absolutes. This scale is also about what is my relation to the alternatives. Have I moved enough on the scale that they're willing to give up and pay the cost of migrating from their current product to my product, right? And so I also have to understand where those other ones really are. And so what I'm going to be asking are these kind of 4 questions. I'm going to say, okay, given I know the utilitarian, given that I want to understand what the value pluses are, that's my goal, and then I can figure out scale, I have to say, okay, what's going on now? Where are their sad faces? What are they paying attention to when they implement this? And this is where we'll see things like a customer journey come really, really handy. And then we can do things like impact management. Will they even notice if I change something? What will be their reaction to that? And I always like to think about when they start using me, what will make them just go, yeah, thank you. Thank you for finally dealing with this. It makes my life so much more enjoyable because I hated having to do this over and over again, right? What you're going to do to make that happen. And then you always got to keep in mind this idea of what's going to drive them to actually switch, right? Because you can make like, oh, that's much nicer, but the costs are so high for me to switch that it's not worth switching. So what will justify, how much do I need to move on that to justify that switch? And so these are the kind of questions we need to be asking. Who should be asking these questions? Well, I think there are 3 kind of major roles in the project who should be being paid to do this. This is their job. And I like to actually hold them accountable. So sometimes it's going to be a marketing manager type person who I have to say, you know what, you're getting paid a lot of money to help understand the market. Tell me what's causing them frowning face. Tell me what's going on here. They should be making these kind of calls. They may be working with or aligned with or the same person as a product manager. To me, this is where product management really hits the road. Do you understand the market? Too many product managers are just simply order takers, that their customer says, hey, we want this feature. And the product manager says, sure, but they don't know why they want it, really. They maybe don't understand the frowny face. They don't understand what's going on here. They don't know how much they need to move it to get it off into the smiley face for them to justify the switch and move. They haven't done any of that work. They just took an order from the customer and then tried to shove it through development. Product management needs to go through and really understand what the scale is, the points on these scales that we're going to talk about in order to make that move. They may be assisted by or substituted for by a business analyst, often called on. In many projects, I like to staff that role if I'm staffing a product owner. Right? So one of the things I want to do with that business analyst product owner is start saying, okay, can you help me come up with scale? Help me understand this journey all over. So that's where we're headed for right now. Can these people do the work that they've been hired to do? And I think they have a set of tools that work relatively well for them. One is the idea of business cases. If they're doing business cases really well, we should start setting up, here's the current situation. If we get it to this level, and then we should be talking about numbers on a scale here, and we'll talk more about that in a second. If we get to this level, then here's what I think we can get in new ROI. And we can then figure out the costs and risks to getting there over a certain period of time. That's the idea of a business case. A business case well done says, here is the current situation, here's where we can go to, here's why it makes a difference to our customers given that costing. This is a tool that they can use to present their findings to the organization. And they may pull that out a little bit with a thing called a customer journey map. A customer journey map just says, what's going on? What's this customer's job? What utility are they trying to perform? This is a great tool to help understand that idea of, this is the job. Where are they getting their frowny faces? And where can we apply technology uniquely to make them a happier person? Now, it could be the technology is not that new. It's not that cutting edge, but we're applying it in a new and different way. That's a great win as well. Another thing I liked, you could use things like impact maps, saying, okay, here is the overall goal we're trying to achieve. Here's the players. Because one of the tricks here, too, with this impact map that I like a lot is that you look at it and it's picking out the actors. Who are the people who are making the value judgments? This is often critical. We often keep thinking as our customer as a large pool of potential people, but I really want to know who are the people that are making this value judgment because they're the ones that I'm trying to sell to, the ones I'm trying to move forward. And then we're going to start saying, how is their life going to be different? That's the impact. That's how we're moving the needle. They're going to find that they're doing their process 20% faster than they were before, and that's what they're frowning faced about. They're going to find out that the correctness of their data entry is 80% better than it was before, and that's what they were frowning about. And so to do that, we're going to build these deliverables. So that's where the impact mechanism is. Now you can tie those deliverables right back to saying, how are we changing that needle? So what are the scales that I typically use to try to capture that? Well, there's three that stand out most of the time, right? One is some sort of time. How long does it take to do something? This is usually a big deal in many organizations who are trying to streamline, trying to go faster, trying to go more smoother. They're going to say, how long does it take me? How much time are you saving me? Because time is money. And so if you can shorten the processing times, make things go faster, often that is one that they care about. That's usually in their value plus system. Many clients I work with, time is usually one that's going to be on the top of my scale. Now, I tell them that when we do time, it's good to know when to start the stopwatch here and when to stop it. What's the period by which I'm measuring this time? But once I've got that figured out, we can start saying, how fast can I do it? Very common scale. Another common scale would be an absolute number. An absolute number is how many of these do I have to? How many instances do I need to support simultaneously? That kind of thing. I see that. I don't see it as much as I do time, amazingly enough, but I do see absolute numbers, pretty regularly. But what I see slightly more than absolute numbers is a ratio. And you can see my third one is a percentage sign. That's just a ratio. Something to 100, that's a ratio. Or you can have this ratio all over the thing. But you see something per day. So number of transactions per hour would be a ratio, whereas number of transactions all by itself would just be a number. Number of transactions per hour would be a ratio. And that's a number one I see fairly frequently with time is a ratio of some kind. Number of customers per month, that kind of thing. And so what I've gone through is I've gone through the customer journey. I've watched where they're getting frustrated. I've watched where they're doing. I can start seeing where we can apply technology. And I start saying, okay, can we speed this up? Can we increase or decrease the number as is appropriate? Can we change the ratio? Okay. Those are the questions we're going to be answering. We're going to choose one of those scales. If I can't find something that fits on one of those scales, I always have my old friend, the Likert scale. Likert scale, you've seen these in surveys and stuff like that. It's just a scale that says, you know what, I don't have an absolute scale that has time or a number or a ratio I want to have, but I can always ask, how do you feel about this? Right? So if I did that customer journey, if I watched someone's workflow, the utilitarian, I can ask them, okay, here, do it now. Rate this on a scale of 1 to 5, or how much do you agree with finding? This was easy to use. Do you strongly agree? Agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree that this was easy to use, right? And you can turn those into numbers, and you can do a little like, well, we were at 3.7, we want to get to 4.5. Will our technology do that? So I always have in the back pocket my Likert scale, but usually I can come up with a scale like time or an absolute number or a ratio to make that happen. Tom Gilb, if you're into Tom Gilb, and I think everyone should be a little bit into Tom Gilb, has a couple to pull this off. His is much more complex than mine because I'm going to show you a simplified approach that hopefully, because my goal is to get organizations to start doing this. I think Tom Gilb is looking at ways to perfect organizations doing this, to get a lot more out of it. I'm just trying to get you started down the road. So here's an example scale. This is an actual scale for a diabetes meter that was used in a field. And what things that we were looking at and what they said was giving them a frowning face is the time between how many cycles it would do after the low battery moment came. So there's a point where when you're using this remote device, it was used in the field, that it ran on a battery, and getting the batteries were not easy. It was in the middle of Africa somewhere, something like that. Getting new batteries weren't easy because there were specialized batteries for this device. And so how many cycles do you keep going after the low battery warning light came on? And so they were getting frustrated because they noticed that where they were was averaging around 60 cycles, and their competitor was averaging around 75 cycles. So now what do we got here? We've got a scale, and we've got some references that says, what's the current value proposition on this scale, right? 60 to 75. We're at 60, the competitor's at 75. So we're getting told, if you can't do this, that might be enough for me to switch to the competitor's product. because this is a big frustration for us. And so the product management went through and said, okay, where we want to really go is about 125, right? So that's a good increase over the competitor. At that point, we get good ROI. Now, what's frustrating sometimes is that when organizations specify this, they'll specify something like 125 here. And when it goes to testing, and what happened in this case, when it went to testing, it was averaging about 120 cycles per minute. And so what happened? The testing failed it because the requirement said it should average about 125 cycles. After the warning that came on, it was only averaging 120, so it failed it. And of course, the developers, when they heard that, said, we're averaging 120. Look, we doubled it. Come on. And the product manager at that point said, it's out of my hands. The requirement said 125. You're only averaging 120. And so they appealed, and they had to hunt down a stakeholder that would actually have the authority to change that and say, okay, here's the situation. It was specified 125. We're averaging 120. Would you accept 120? Would you accept a change request for a requirement to say 120? And the product manager said, you doubled it. That's great. 120 is fine. Well, we just spent a whole lot of time and money, and it didn't change the product at all, and that's waste. So in addition to setting the target, I also like to set a clear failure point. A failure point says, here's a point that if we don't get to this point, I can't sell enough units to justify the cost. You're telling me the cost of this project is roughly X. If we can't get to at least here at that cost, then let's not bother. Let's just do something else, because I won't sell enough units to justify between 75 and 100 to justify that. I can't get people to switch for only that small amount. I can get them to switch at 125, but I can't get them to switch at 100. And so there's a failure point. I set a clear, strong binary point where I'm not going to go past that overall. In the same token, I like to set a stretch point. A stretch point says, here's a point that says, you know what, I love to have this, but I'm not willing to pay for it. Because remember, as we tend to get more aggressive on the scale, we get closer to the smiley face, I'm going to be more expensive and take longer. And so 150 may take a lot longer than 125. I'm not willing to pay that extra time. I love to have it if you could give it to me, but I'm only willing to pay for 125. So the stretch says, okay, if you get here, great. If you go past this, please spend no amount of additional resources to go past that number. It's not worth one extra minute of your time to go past 150, because I cannot sell any more units at 160 or 170 or 200 than I can at 150. And so if you invest more time and money at 160, 170, 200 than you do at 150, it's just total loss to us as a company. No additional value. Right? It's not going to make the customer any happier. We sort of maxed out there a little bit. So this is now, could the technology do more? Sure. Would they be happy at 200? Sure. But will we sell more units? No. Right? So customer happiness may increase, but our sales will not, because they're actually equally happy to buy at 150. And so that extra cost would just be eaten by us. Now, I like to call the distance between that failure and the target as my tolerance. I like this idea that software in the requirements should have a tolerance, just like any other engineering discipline out there that specifies things. If I look at the amount of my resistors, there's always a tolerance on them. If I look at my depth and screws, there's always a tolerance about everything. I think we have a tolerance in software here, and we have it on the scales that define what our value actually means. If we land in this zone, we'll ship it, right? We're shipping here. It's great. And you can play around and make adjustments as a team without coming back and asking permission, because we'll pass anything that lands in the zone. It's within tolerance. So just to really iterate those 3 points on the scale, I think the stretch is my maximum value that has ROI. Now, I think you can go higher from that, and it might even make the customer happy, but it doesn't have ROI anymore. And this is the point they say, you know what, I love to have it, but generally the stretch is too expensive. Right? It's just going to cost too much to go. What we're going to negotiate and do is a target point. The target point is a point of saying, okay, given that cost and where we're going to land on the scale, this is what I agreed to do. Let's go for it. We're going to aim for this target. And a fail point. A fail point says, if you do not get to at least here, and then I'm going to be upset. If you get close to this or just past it, I'm going to ship, but we're still going to be having some words because we agreed on a target. I do never want to just say the fail point or higher, right? It's like, well, it should be at least X or higher or X or lower. Because if I say that, I'm going to get something close to that X. If we came back here to our friends on the scale and we said, well, okay, it just has to be 100 or better, what we'll likely see is 101, 102, 99, and starting having the whole discussion over again, right? Not worth it. And so you always want to specify on these scales 3 different points that sets up our tolerance. So this is how we do it. We're going to watch the customer. We're going to have those product marketing people or product management, and primarily product management, maybe assisted by business analysts, really watch the customer. Find out when they're doing their utilitarian work, what's driving them nuts. Then we're going to use that to start saying, okay, here's how we're going to specify. We're going to use these categories from ISO 5010. And then we're going to say, where are we now? Where would there be the happy? And then this is where product management has to earn their money. Where do we need to land for them to make the switch to the new product that we would get ROI still on that level of investment? Okay. So a couple supporting thoughts before we get into questions, some bonus value, I hope. One of the cool things that if you do this, one of the things I love is that if I'm at a big function, I can start at the top of my function tree, and functions have this beautiful habit of decomposing. If I start at the top of my function tree and I specify a value in the top, all the way at the bottom, I still have to support that value. I don't need to specify it over and over and over again. This is a huge win. So when I'm working with clients, I can say, okay, we're going to spend significant time really nailing the values at the top of our function tree, our major value propositions, if you will, and then we don't have to specify them because it inherits down. Now, there's a few patterns of inheritance, but it's always some level of inheriting. So I specify on top and let it inherit down. That makes my life so much easier. The other thing is that I want to start saying my solutions are not really my value proposition. Features, I think, and features, when I say the words features here, I mean technology applied to solve a particular problem, but a set of technology. Usually, I need a string of features working together to do any kind of real consumer job. One feature by itself typically doesn't do the job. I have to have some other features strung together. Say my camera focusing, right? Focusing, you can say is a feature. It has autofocus, that's a feature. But if I don't have a good shutter, I don't have a memory card, I'm not taking a photo regardless of my shutter speed and my autofocus, right? I need a whole series of things to actually do the real job, which is take a photo. So I want to specify my value and say, okay, how are these features helping me achieve that value? And so don't confuse features with value, I always say, especially when we're talking about features as things like autofocus. Autofocus by itself is lovely. I love it, but I have to have a string of things to actually do the real utilitarian job, which is take a photo. Okay. So to wrap up here, to give you an example what something like this look like, if I said my main thing I want to do that we've been the customer journey is tracking defects, right? We have a team that wants to track defects. Where are we watching their things that they're hating right now? Well, one thing that they care about a lot is ease of use. They're really upset with how hard it is to do the current tracking system. And we could have done number of clicks, we could have done something else, but here they went to a Likert scale. Right, so a percentage of fives on a 5-point scale, so a Likert scale. And currently, we're seeing about 80, so we got to get to at least 90, target 98, stretch 100. Now, interesting the stretch here, because I'm happy to give them the stretch what I won't give them the target. I will never give a target of 100%. Why? Because 100% could be extremely expensive to build. It might be too costly. And so I'll give them the stretch. We're not willing to pay for it. But I understand your desires, but the target's going to have to be something that we say, this is something achievable within a certain period of time at a certain cost. And I have one for reliability. I have one for install use as well here as well. So I start specifying, this is how I get my requirements to be measurable. I have to start with something like ISO 250. I start watching and saying, what are they going to be paying attention to? And that drives it home. All right. I'm now open up for questions, comments, and thoughts from the crowd.
You stunned them into silence, Earl.
I put them to sleep.
Somnambulous.
I told you I was trying to record this for YouTube, and I got several messages saying, the recording is being overwhelmed. Try changing your video parameters. Like, well, I'm giving a talk right now. How in the hell do I change my video parameters?
Oh,
but
well,
we'll see
that's
what
weird.
comes out.
Yeah. Okay. I have one in the category of watch the customer. The people seem to like that particular element. How do you get strategies or how do you get more engagement if you don't get access to the sponsors or don't get access or frequent access to the customer? What's the best way of handling that?
Right. So if you don't get frequent access to the customer, I think one of the primary ways we want to handle that, I think there's a couple of variations on this thing, but one is to come up with your own pseudo customer. We do this typically in the marketing world through a thing called personas. Personas are an instantiation demographic. This is what we think the customers like. This is what we think they love. This is what they think they hate. This is what we think they're frustrated. And I capture those as a short couple paragraphs description of them and them trying to do the job. And I list their main pain points and I list what would make them happy. And I start floating that up the chain. I'm saying, here's who we're building this for. And I call this process backfill. Backfill is a polite way of saying we may crap up. It better be. I hope it's right. So but instead of just making stuff, because what's going to happen is that every team member on that project, here's what happens when you don't do this. Every team member is going to be trying to guess who we're making this for. And if they don't know, they tend to make it for themselves because that's the only person that they know. Oh, I think this is how it should work. So use the persona to say, as a team, here's who we're making this for. We float that up the chain saying, if this is not the person or the class that we're making this for, now is a really good time to tell us because this is where we're going. And at least as a team, we're all on the same page. So the personas are a really good thing. Agile's thing, as you know, Mark, is to let's make something of it and stick it out there and see what the hell happens. Right? We can't directly access it, but we hear a lot from the call room or the help desk about the number of calls come in. So let's try that and see what happens. Let's see how time stuff blows up. That's another option, right? That you put it out in the wild and see what happens. Or you create playrooms where people come in and play with it, but you don't have access to sponsors. So putting it out in the live world is another option that some people choose. I don't like that one for medical device software that I work with. It's like, oh, yeah, we put that out. Oh, damn, 4 people died. Oh, well, let's pull that back and rapidly fail fast. Like, no, we can't fail really much at all. Sorry, not an option. So personas are a great technique. Doing your own customer journeys, writing your own scenarios. Okay. This is where, again, that business analyst I talked about, the product manager, they have these tools in their tool belt, and we should really take advantage of them to help quantify these things. And when they're not doing it, either we got to skill them up because they don't have the skills, or we got to say, no, you got to come back and do this and do it right for us.
So this might link to this question, and I'm not actually sure this is a question, but it comes in as how much does skill set help here? In other words, a really, really good product manager versus an adequate or okay one. Are you at risk for having a widely different final answer depending on who you have playing in those roles?
Yeah. So one of the things, and we talked about this in another webinar, but I love it, is that if when people think about skill sets, they usually think from low to high skill set. They usually think, oh, it's some sort of bell curve, and the average person is somewhere in the middle. But the skill distribution for a lot of these things from low to high is much more like this. Most people are closer to the low end and very few people on the high end. So yeah, if you have an average project manager, they're sitting here, here's the average, right? It's pretty close to poor skilled. So on one hand, I like to say, well, can we upskill that person? There's organizations like the Pragmatic Institute whose whole career is about how do we upskill product managers. We teach requirements that tries to upskill them a little bit there. But yeah, if you're sitting out here with a good project manager, right, they've got these skills. You're hearing the customer journeys. You're hearing the story. You're always getting the big picture, so you know what this person's pain points are, and you're probably making the right thing. If you're average project manager, you're in a little more trouble. So one of the things I do with the average project manager is I'm still going to do that persona thing because I'm pretending I have to go around and say, do I actually have the true voice of the customer, or am I getting an order taker? Because the average, I think, project manager is more closer to the order taker than is the analyst, right? And so when they come up and they're going to give me a solution, They're going to say, here's the solution, Earl. And I'm going to say, great, got the solution. Tell me what's going on. How is this going to make their life better? How are they moving from frowny face to smiley face? Right? That's what I'm looking for.
Makes sense. So some of your examples are, you might want to say more sophisticated scales or more detailed scales. What if somebody chooses a scale that says binary, like yes or no? Is that a worthless scale, or is that not? Do you go back and reject that and say you need more detail?
Yeah, I almost always reject the binary scale because to me that's more of an issue that what they're really doing is they're confusing the value with a feature, right? Because I usually the binary thing, is autofocus there or not? Yeah, it's there. It's working.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right? But it doesn't tell me what job the person was doing that's now better because of it. What do you do? What is autofocus doing? Is that 70% of my photos are more likely to come out in focus than before autofocus? Is my ability from aim to first shot reduced by 30%? What is it that autofocus is doing for them that they're going to move from frowny face to smiley face? You haven't told me that. And so when I get a yes, no, it's usually because they've given me a feature. They haven't really given me an ability to start saying, oh, all right, I understand the job. I understand the context. I understand what's going to drive them to say this is valuable to me.
Gotcha. Okay, Chris writes, it seems that much of what you're talking about is the nature of quality in its different forms and quality attributes or non-functional requirements. How do you feel about associating quality so directly with value? Is there a risk that there are aspects of value we miss with this approach?
So I think, yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm certainly not attacking any of the exchange value, aesthetic value, or emotional value. So those things, you could have a product, let's say that I'm an Apple lover, and they come out with the 40th anniversary Mac. I think it's been around 40 years since the Mac came out, and it actually is one of the early Macs, and it hardly runs anything, but I buy it just because I'm attached. I've been a Mac fan for years, so I buy it. That's all emotional exchange, right? It's emotional value that it's getting. It has no utilitarian use whatsoever. It just sits on my desk taking up space. Yeah, I miss that entirely here. I think that's pretty rare in most of our product teams. And so when you say, do I equate it with quality? So what the hell is quality then, right? Right? I mean, I'll push it back on that a little bit, saying quality means I can use it to get my job done in a way that makes sense to me. That's all quality actually means. If you start citing quality as inherent goodness of itself, that's useless. One of the things that was always funny is that they used to have this award in the United States for a top quality company called the Malkard-Baldrige Award. And initially, it was a competition about who can improve quality the most. And they were trying to treat quality as an absolute. And what happened is that most people that won the award were out of business within a few years because they went past what their customers valued.
Right.
Right. So I'm trying to say, find those points on the quality scales, because there is a perfection point somewhere. But we probably don't need perfection. We need enough to say this product, when they watch it, when they compare it to their other alternatives, we're going to say this is far more valuable to me.
Makes sense. How about things like absolutes? Like what if a customer says something has to be 100%? And the example that's being given is security, which seems like that should be on everybody's list in some respects, particularly if you're out facing. So would anybody ever say, well, you give me 90%, I'm okay? They probably wouldn't do that, right? They'd probably force you to look at 100%. So what does that mean, right? How do you deal with that?
Right. So I often see something like that when people, especially when dealing with standards, right? The standard says we have to use this particular security protocol, for example, the 256 keys or something like that, right? We have to use some sort of thing. And then say, oh, our scale is yes or no, 100% or 0, right? You have to have it. You cannot not have it. Well, first of all, like in that security one, what I'd say, okay, what is the journey here? What is the customer frowny faced about? They're not frowny faced that you're not using 256 keys. They have no idea what kind of key links you have or something like that. What they're frowny faced about is that their credit card information is stolen, their personal data is stolen. Okay, so if that's frowny faced, what would be fine? Their stuff is never stolen. Great. We understand what the other end of the very happy face scale is, what they'll have. What would it cost us to have a system where I guarantee that your data is never, ever stolen, cannot be stolen, impossible to steal. What would I have to build to do that? And the honest answer is, I can't build anything to do that. There's always a human being involved. There's the storage, there's the transport. Somewhere, someone might be able to sneak in. When we think we've solved it, NSA finds another way to get it. It's just, there's always something that's it. So it's not about getting to 100%. 100% is expensive. I understand that's your desire. We have to, but the question is, if we lost 2 people, we have 2 million customers. If we lost 5 people's data in a year, what would happen? Probably nothing. Right. And so one of those skills I love to think about that one is number of times we appear in the newspaper per decade in regards to data loss, right? If we never appear in a decade in regard to data loss, our data is fine. We've spent the right amount for the value of our customers.
That makes sense.
So really, value to me is not this ultimate quality goal, which is like 100% would be my ultimate quality goal. Value is this dance between a particular customer set and what they're willing to pay me for to switch from their current solution.
Yep. Tom has a rephrasing for you. Perfect qualities have infinite costs.
Perfect qualities have infinite costs. I love that.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you. I'm stealing that. It's stolen.
I love it. Let's see. Anything else I can see here? Can you expand a bit on customer journey mapping? How do we get it rolling if we've never used it before in an organization?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of good resources on online, but just briefly, what you do is you start out with a scenario. And a scenario is basically one path of doing something, of doing a job. I was recently worked with a medical device who make a molecular tester. And so the job we had was run test lot, right? That's the job. So we start going through, okay, what's one scenario? What's one way of running a test lot that's maybe the most common way? And you walk through the steps. You just basically do your workflow. Now, customer journey and workflow to me are roughly the same exact thing, except customer journey is told with pictures and little stick figures and fake little machines and how they move around, as opposed to workflow boxes. Because when you do the pictures with the boxes, you can start showing emotions, right? The happy faces, the frowny faces, the excited arrows. Where in a workflow diagram, a simple one like this one here, it's just boxes and lines. But with the images, you can start showing them smiling or frustrated or angry, and that brings out more information. So a customer journey is basically a storyboard, if you're familiar with movie things, stuff like that, a picture telling of a workflow. So start out with your workflow and then see if you can add that emotional element, some of that happiness, and just ratio of things like, here, I'm pushing a cart. It's like, why am I pushing a cart? I don't want to push a cart. Kind of thing.
Good thing. We are a little inside the top of the hour. Do you want to have any final thoughts here, Earl? I don't. We can wait for one more question if somebody wants to pop in, but I'll just.
No, I think give them back a minute in their day, right?
I like it.
Right, so we'll just give them a thank them for coming.
Okay. Well, you see Earl's slide there in terms of our wrap on this. I think we've done a good job today. Earl, you did a great job. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights. Guests, thanks for joining in. Thanks for your questions. Again, this is going to be up on our YouTube channel shortly. So if you had to step out for a minute, boss called you away, something like that, you'll be able to access what you missed. And definitely feel free to send this along to colleagues and friends as well who couldn't join us live today. And again, one final note, if you have comments or like to talk to Earl or one of our other practitioners, I have ideas for a future webinar, reach out via comments@construx.com. Again, it's comments@construx.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. And one more self-promotion thing here. Episode 45 of the podcast actually deals with value identification in a little more detail. We had a little roundtable conversation on that. You might want to go check that one out if you like this one. That might be something you want to try. So on behalf of Earl and myself, thanks, everyone. Have a great day.